Business Review of 2019, Boeing, Huawei, and Brexit. The past year saw one of the great U.S. companies, Boeing, suffer a hammer blow to its reputation after one of its newest models, the 737 MAX, crashed for the second time. The loss in March of an Ethiopian Airlines plane cost the lives of all 157 people on board. The disaster turned out not to have been caused by terrorism or a catastrophic mechanical failure, but because the pilots couldn't control a piece of software. The software was a system called MCAS, which had already been identified as a key factor in the crash of a Lion Air Boeing 737 MAX in Indonesia the previous October, which killed 189 passengers and crew. Radro. The U.S.-China trade dispute ground on through 2019, with partial resolutions giving way to new tariffs then new to escalations. The elbow between the two countries was sharpened by the U.S. decision to target the Chinese technology giant Huawei. Huawei is a world leader in systems that send out signals to mobile phones, in particular, 5th generation or 5G networks. But the U.S. has banned the use of Huawei's equipment in America and encouraged its allies to do the same. The U.S. also stopped Huawei using systems developed by American companies including Google's Android operating system that was formerly installed on Huawei's mobile phones. The Trump administration believes that China's technological advances have been built upon stolen intellectual property and heavy government subsidies. Washington also believes Huawei is ultimately controlled by the Chinese government and that therefore there is a security risk if its technology is embedded in the latest U.S. communications infrastructure. Whither Britain? The big news for Britain in 2019 was the confirmation that the country really is leaving the European Union. Voters made that choice in a referendum in 2016. But in the past 3 years politicians argued continually about whether the country should rerun the vote or decide to nominally leave the EU but continue to apply its rules and regulations. The victory of Boris Johnson's Conservative Party finally settled the principle of what happens. The managing director of Capital Economics Forecasting Group in London, Roger Bootle, told me he was delighted and relieved at the election result. I think there would have been huge risks to staying in the EU. He argues that over recent decades the EU has been a zone of relative economic failure. All this is only going to get worse, we would have been in a very vulnerable position. By contrast, the trade specialist, Rebecca Harding, who is chief executive of Coriolis Technologies, says she is disappointed by the result as she wanted Britain to stay in the EU. A lot of our trade is woven into European supply chains. The issue now is that we need to extricate ourselves from the EU's rules and regulations in a way that does the least damage to the British economy, says Ms. Harding.